one, and then give just another minute. I personally don't like rewarding people that are late, so. You're in the right place if you came to learn about no money down real estate. Or as I like to call it, creative financing. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is 11:03. So I'm Cortney Jones. I'm coaching here at Bliss, but I've been an investor for.
No. Yeah, no.
I'm sorry.
That's
Somebody's not on mute.
yeah, and talk to.
I've been an investor for 30 years. And actually 31 in November. So going on my 31st year, I started buying properties when I had no money. So I didn't have a choice but to learn no money down investing. And over the years, it kind of became one of those things that I really didn't see a reason to do it any differently, because there was enough deals out there where I didn't have to put my own money in. So I never really changed my business model. And then I was able to use my money for other investments and kind of diversify my portfolio was sort of my mindset and my thought process. You guys, did you all can somebody confirm that you did get the notice that it was being recorded?
Yes, I did.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure. I didn't see anything showing that it was recording, and I was like, wait, what's happening? Did I forget to do that? So that's basically the way I've kind of always run my investment model. And until just this year, actually, I've never gotten a bank loan for an investment property. And this year I did it. I think I might have told the story on a previous training, but basically for a condo that my daughter bought as her first rental property. But she was only 17 when she bought it, so she couldn't actually qualify for a loan. But she had the down payment money that she'd saved. So we got the loan in our name, and then we were able to deed the house to her so that she would have that in her starting portfolio. So that's sort of how I've always done it. And then I did creative investing for about 7 to 8 years. And then I actually got my real estate license after I started kind of doing that. And then I opened up my own brokerage back where we have most of our portfolio. There wasn't really a property management company that did things to my liking. And so we ended up having to start our own property management company. And so I had a brokerage and my property management company managing our own properties. And then of course, it just kind of snowballs from there. Then you're like, well, if we're going to manage our own properties, why not manage other investors' properties? And the next thing you know, you have this humongous company that's very stressful to run and huge. But it was great at the time. When I moved back here 10 years ago, I decided to kind of slow things down a little bit, enjoy the last 10 years with my daughter before she went off to college. But I still buy properties on a regular basis. And then I coach people around the country to do it. And I usually end up partnering with them on deals. So I have a portfolio in a lot of different states. I have properties in 9 states now. But the majority of them are in Tennessee, but all of them, again, have been used doing creative financing, the things I'm going to show you today. So hopefully you can gain some stuff out of this. Now, the beauty of these things is I'm not going to teach you everything I've learned in 31 years in an hour. So if you have questions or whatever, you're always free to get a hold of me. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about, which is when can you do creative financing? Who would agree to doing no money down deals? What exactly is creative financing? So those are the main 3 things we're going to cover today. And then I'll show you some case studies, and then I'll show you where you can get some additional training if you're interested in that, primarily on wholesaling if you missed the wholesaling class. So as interest rates climb and inventory rises, which is obviously the market that we're in right now, owners and sellers tend to get more open to creative financing. They don't have to when you're in a hot market, right? Even if you have a dumpy property, people are going to overpay for it, and they're going to pay whatever they can and get it, just to have inventory or just to have a place to live. And you'll see my note down there also, smart agents do too, because you have to start to get a little bit more creative when inventory rises as an agent, because you want your house to stand out, your listings to stand out from other people's. As an investor, you know that this is a really good time to start to find more deals. In the last couple of years, it's been a little bit harder. Almost anybody could get whatever they wanted for a property and asked. Now things are going to get back to normal, which is great for everyone, in my opinion. So there's always motivated sellers. Always, always, always. Long before 2007 and 8 happened, I was doing this. I just told you I've been doing this for 31 years. So there's always motivated sellers. Does the number of motivated sellers fluctuate? You know, yes, obviously in 2006, 7, and 8, we had a lot more motivated sellers, people who were facing foreclosure and issues because their rates had gone up and they couldn't afford the houses that they were in. They were given loans that they should have never been given, and all kinds of reasons that these people became motivated. So at that period in time, there was an excessive amount. The first time I ever negotiated a short sale was in 1997, long before the whole 2007 crash and people hearing all about short sales. So there's always motivated sellers and always people that need to sell, that not just want to sell, which is really the definition of a motivated seller. So a person who needs to sell, not just wants to sell, okay? Needing to sell comes in various forms. What are the reasons that these people need to sell? Well, sometimes it's simple life things, right? They're facing foreclosure for whatever reason. They're going through a divorce. There's been a death or a probate type of situation in the family, a job loss or a transfer. You know, if you're told by your company, hey, I need you to be at this new job where you're going to make more money, but you have to move across the country and you have to do that in 2 weeks, most people do that. And now all of a sudden they have 2 house payments or at least 2 living expenses. They might be in an apartment temporarily at the other place. But that's a very common one that I see kind of a lot. Code violations is a huge motivator. You know, sometimes it's really sad. Sometimes it's a situation where it's like an elderly person. Actually, the last house I just made an offer on, this was the situation. The elderly person just couldn't keep up with the house anymore, but she's lived there now for like, you know, 50 years, but she's older. She's 82 and she just lives by herself. She doesn't have any family nearby. Everybody's a couple of hours away. She can't keep up with it. And she doesn't have the money to hire like a landscaper to come in regularly. So she keeps getting these code violations from the city. And, you know, that's causing her a lot of stress because she feels bad because that's not what she wants to have happen, but she doesn't have any other options. So there's, you know, things like that happen. People get into trouble with back taxes. Medical issues is a huge one. I see this a lot. Tired, burned out landlords, people who have a portfolio and just get older and they're just like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And then there's the in over their head investors. Everybody thinks this is easy till they start doing it. I've seen a lot of in over your head investors in the last year because the government basically told you that you couldn't collect the rents you thought you could collect. So a lot of investors, I wouldn't necessarily say they were truly in over their head, but they weren't prepared for that type of a environment. So they didn't have the money to make those payments for a year. Empty nesters is a big reason for motivation. It's a slightly less motivated person than say someone obviously going through a divorce or facing foreclosure, but it's still a level of motivation we see quite often. And ill and elderly is huge. A lot of times people going into assisted living or nursing home type facilities, they need to sell their house to be able to afford that new facility. And then there's always everybody's own motivations. Like we never really know what's going on in people's lives. There's reasons that they may want to move. The lady that I was telling you about with the code violations, she would like to move closer to her family, even though she doesn't really want to leave her house. She understands now that she just can't really take care of it. So now she has a double motivation because she really just wants to sell the house to move closer to her family, which is a couple hours away. And then I don't know that I would classify free and clear as a motivation, but it makes them more flexible. So 34% of the homes in the United States are currently owned free and clear, meaning there's no mortgage on them at all. And so with the free and clear people, you can be very creative, because if they were to sell a $500,000 house, they're likely going to have a big tax bill that goes along with that. And so they like to be creative because they like the idea of monthly income and supplementing their Social Security. Plus, they don't want to have to pay the extra taxes. Now, I said that as though all free and clear people are older. And what's interesting is that in the last probably, I'd say 6 to 7 years, I'm seeing lots of young people with free and clear homes, people who made a lot of money in crypto and technology and other things like that. So you want to always be careful not to just prejudge what somebody, a free and clear person is somebody that's over 65 or 70 is what most people think. You'd be surprised. But these are all kind of various different reasons for motivation. And so all of these people have a different level of wanting to sell because they need to sell. They don't just want to sell. And so that's where we tend to find a better opportunity to do creative financing type things. So what is creative financing? Technically, my term is that it's anything that isn't traditional bank financing. So some of the things you'll hear people talk about is like owner financing, which we're going to cover all of these. Subject to, it's also sometimes just called sub to, wraparound mortgages, and owner carrybacks. So creative financing is, most of us know how to buy a house. Obviously, as realtors, we know the traditional method of going to a bank or mortgage broker or mortgage banker and going in and getting a mortgage and financing a house, putting down 20% down, or if we're doing it FHA, 3.5% or whatever. We understand that is traditional purchasing and traditional bank financing. So anything outside of that is what I consider to be creative financing. And we'll take a look at some of the different variations of that and what that can look like for different transactions. And of course, hopefully you're watching this from the perspective of, I personally would like to build a portfolio, and I want to learn this so that maybe I can purchase some properties of my own and build my own portfolio. But you should also be watching it with your realtor hat, because there will be times when you'll be around people who need this sort of help, or who have a house that maybe this would apply for. And so that these can be beneficial things for you as your realtor hat as well. So what type of properties can you buy creatively? Well, basically anything, to be honest. I've bought hotels, apartment buildings, single family homes, condos. I've never bought any of the others. Well, businesses, I bought businesses, but you can buy land, office buildings, restaurants, storage units, businesses, all types of things using creative financing. It's known in the real estate world more commonly than anything, but I actually even know 2 people who bought cars subject to. So the person got these cars, and it was 2 separate occasions. They couldn't afford their car payments anymore. And so I have 2 friends who, one was actually, technically it was a motorcycle, but so one of my 2 friends actually purchased these properties subject to the financing and just took over the mortgages or the loans on those and got the cars. So you can really use this in a lot of different areas. Most people get started in the single family home arena, but it's also very useful in apartment buildings, and actually quite common more in apartment buildings than it is in houses. It's not as uncommon to make an owner financing offer with apartments. It's actually more common because, you have larger down payments and stuff. So it's very common to say to the seller, yeah, I don't have the 300,000, but if you'll carry back part of that. They understand that terminology a lot more than single family homeowners. Usually you have to educate single family homeowners more on it and talk to them more in terms that they would understand and kind of explain it to them a little bit better. These glasses are driving me crazy. I'm going to switch. Sorry, guys. They keep falling down and it's giving me a little bit of an annoyance. There we go. Oh, I can't see now, but at least that's not going to be falling. So those are the different types of properties that you can buy creatively. I have had, well, I'll show you in the case study, actually, some apartment buildings and fourplexes that I've bought with literally 0 down. So over the years. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is owner financing. Now, this is when an owner agrees to finance the purchase. So this can be all or part of the purchase price. It's going to be financed by the owner. Essentially, what's happening is that the owner is becoming the bank. Okay, so instead of you going to Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Citibank or any of those for a loan for the property, the owner of the property is going to become the bank. So the payments that would have gone to the lender, the bank that we just talked about, are now going to go to the owner. This is a great way for the owners of properties to continue to receive cash flow without the headaches of managing a property. That's why oftentimes it's an easy explanation to people who own multifamily properties, but also single family homes. If they're a landlord and they're used to getting, you know, $1,000 a month check from a tenant, and now you're offering to give them that same $1,000 a month without them having to manage any of that, that can be extremely beneficial and exciting for them, because they're like, yeah, I don't have to deal with any of the other crap. It can also help relieve a tax burden. So if they happen to have the equity is over 250 for a single person or 500 for a married couple, and or they haven't lived in the house 2 of the last 5 years, they're going to have a serious tax issue when they go to sell this property. So by offering owner financing, now they're only going to have to pay taxes on that income that's coming in as it's coming in. And I'm not a CPA, so verify that with your CPAs. But that is the reality of it. So it can definitely help the owner in that respect. So that's oftentimes a good reason for them to also consider such an offer. I really like this with retiring and tired landlords who own their properties free and clear, because a lot of times they're elderly and they've owned an apartment building for, you know, 10, 15, 20 years. They've got it paid off or close to being paid off, and they're used to having that extra money coming in. And the idea of all of a sudden not having that money flow coming in makes them a little scared. And so continuing to be able to provide a flow of cash to them is something that makes them kind of go, okay, yeah, I think I would consider that. And when you do owner financing, you're using the exact same promissory note and deed or mortgage, depending on the state, that is used by going to a lender. So we covered that in the previous training that I did, basically on how mortgages work and how financing works. We talked about the promissory note and the deed or trust or mortgage. So it's exactly the same way. Subject to is basically where you are taking over an existing loan that is on a property and you're having the property deeded to you. So you're the investor. This is common in this situation, a divorce situation. We see this all the time. Somebody's going through a divorce. They need to sell the house. There's a slight amount of equity in it, but not a lot. And they get ready to go sell the house, and they're each going to end up with a certain amount of money or whatever. But by the time they pay everything, there's not going to be a whole lot, but they need to sell quickly. And in markets other than the last few years, that doesn't always happen. So subject to can be really, really handy in that situation. We come in, we take over the payments, we alleviate that concern for them. They're going through enough as it is. They are stressing out, they're tearing their families apart. These are all the things they're thinking. They're going through all of this, and this is just one more financial burden and one more stressor on their list of things that they have to deal with. So we can take over that payment for them in the manner of subject to. The house gets deeded to us. It's no longer a burden to them and no longer something that they need to worry about. And the question always comes up when we talk about subject to. People always say, is that legal? And if you look at any HUD-1 form on line 203 and 503, you'll see it says right there, printed in there, that existing loans subject to. It's extremely common in commercial properties, but it is very legal in residential properties. On the closing statement, if you're looking at a closing statements in section L and N, number 3, you are not assuming the loans. It's a little different than when I first started back in the early 90s and late 80s. They had assumable loans. You don't really have those so much anymore, but so it's different than that. You're not assuming it, and you don't need bank approval to do subject to. Now, you need to be aware that there is a clause in almost all mortgages that says that the loan may be called due, and may is the key word there for all of those. So yes, when you transfer it and the deed transfers from one owner to another, the bank or mortgage holder, whoever that is, may call that loan due, and you would owe that a full amount in full. In my lifetime, I've done over 200 of these. I've never had a loan called due, knock on wood. I do know a couple people who have had them done. One of them just received a few letters and ignored them, and it went away, and they never pursued it anymore. And then the other one did end up having to refinance and get it paid off. But I mean, all in all, it doesn't happen too often, and it is an easy way to creatively buy. Now, in this one, it's not so much that you're buying no money down, because a lot of times this is a really great strategy to use for foreclosures. So somebody might be 3-4 payments behind on their mortgage, and then you come in and take over the payments for them. You're going to have to make up that arrears in order to keep everything moving forward. So you can buy it technically with no money down, but you're going to have to pay that arrears. Now, if it's a divorce situation, like I described before, that may not be the case. You're just going to hop right in, take over those payments. So some of these are, it depends on the situation, whether you're going to be able to get in for completely no money down or not, but it's definitely something that can happen. And then there's the wraparound mortgage. So the wraparound mortgage, this was the one that always was the hardest for me to learn. I don't know why. I did this business for probably 5 years before I finally fully understood this. And now I don't understand it because I'm like, it's so simple. But when you're just trying to learn this stuff, sometimes it can be hard, I know. So the wraparound mortgage is basically existing financing plus owner financing. So as an example, let's say an owner owns a building that's worth about $2 million, but he only owes $680,000 on it. Okay, so there's quite a bit of equity in that, and the mortgage on it still is $680. If they agree to do a wraparound mortgage for say 2.1 million, okay, it's not uncommon to get a slightly higher sales price when you're offering terms. Okay, so let's say they agree to sell it to you for 2.1 million. Then you would be making payments to that owner on the 2.1 million. So you have a new mortgage. Okay, that new mortgage has wrapped around, if you will, the old mortgage. Okay, so you have a new mortgage on top of the old mortgage, so it's kind of wrapped around it. So now you're making payments on that 2.1, and then that seller that you're making those payments to is going to pay their initial mortgage. So they are going to pay on that 680,000 while you're paying them on that 2.1 million. You do always want to protect yourself and record those wraps in the county records. Otherwise, there's no record of that. Then it still looks like that initial owner owns that property, which could be obviously detrimental. So you're just wrapping that new mortgage around the old one. And so it's really actually very simple. I sometimes wonder why I made it more complicated than it was. And then lastly, there's a carryback mortgage. So a carryback mortgage is when the owner or seller agrees to carry usually a second mortgage when the buyer doesn't have the entire or part of the down payment money, but maybe they can qualify for a loan. Now you can use this in various forms. Sometimes you can use it when they can't qualify for a loan if you're willing to sell to somebody in that situation. I've done many carrybacks for people who can't qualify for a loan, but the reason they can't qualify for a loan is because of like medical bills or something like that. Other than that, their credit's in good shape. So I just personally don't think it's, that doesn't make them a bad person. They still pay their bills. They just got a medical issue that caused them to have a bad situation. So it just depends on the situation, but typically it's somebody that can qualify for a loan, but the seller agrees to carry back part of it. So let's say, as an example, the building is listed for 2 million. 30% down payment might be required on that if it's a multifamily. So that would be $600,000. Let's say you have $150,000 for the down payment, then the seller can carry back a note for the remaining $450,000. So they're going to write a promissory note like we talked about before and have a mortgage attached to that, which would be in second position for that $450,000. And you can structure these in any way you want. So this could be paid monthly. It could be paid interest only. It can be paid as an amortized loan, meaning that you're paying interest and principal. It could be a balloon payment in 3, 5, or 7 years, whatever. That's really kind of the beauty of owner financing type deals, is you can really structure them however it works for all of you. So those are the main components of buying no money down. There is really no right or wrong way to structure these deals. as long as they work for you and the seller. You can get very creative, and you can combine a lot of what I just said. You can combine some of all of those things in one deal if it works. It's just a matter of trying to figure out exactly what's happening with that particular seller and how you can solve their problem. Anytime someone calls me with one of these deals, they'll start to go on and on and on about the house. And I'm like, I don't care about the house. What's the situation? The house doesn't matter. It's the situation in this case that matters. It's like, I need to know what's the seller's motivation. What are they trying to accomplish? What's their key things that are going to motivate them to move? What are they looking for and why? Like, almost everybody says, well, they want all cash. Okay, why? What are they going to do with the cash? If they're going to sit in the bank for 0.02% interest, then I can offer them something better than that. So in owner financing type situations, that's all we really care about is the situation, because you can solve the problem if you know the person's situation and what they are trying to accomplish. The house is secondary, as long as it's not falling down, and even those are fine because we can wholesale those. So let's take a look at some case studies. But before we do, does anybody have any questions you want at this stage? You can unmute yourself and ask a question. No questions? Did I put you all to sleep already?
No, I'm loving it. No questions.
Okay. Okay. Like, yeah, as I hear snoring in the background, like, okay.
Oh no, that's my husband making noise, clearing his throat. I have a question for me. As far as the owner financing, now that doesn't require a down payment, is that correct?
It just depends. It depends on what the owner says. So I've had plenty of owners ask for down payments, but require, no. I mean, it's a matter of, it's all a negotiating part. So some people will ask for it. If an attorney gets involved, they'll definitely ask for it, which is fine, and then some owners won't ask for it at all. It's sort of like interest. I would say 75% of the time when I'm doing owner financing deals, I don't even present interest. I just say, here's, okay, let's say I'm giving you $100,000 a month for 10 years. That's $1,000 a month. I'll have you paid in full in 10 years. I never even mention interest, and they never ask. But every now and then you'll have somebody that will go, well, wait, what interest rate is that? And then you go, oh, you want interest? Oh, okay, well, hold on, let me recalculate it. So it just, and down payments are kind of the same way. Sometimes you'll have people ask for them, sometimes you won't,
Okay. Now, as far as the subject too, I know you were stating, I tried to take notes. Is that what, let me see, let me read real quick. Okay, so I know you were saying you don't need a bank as far as that's concerned. Now, as far as the deed is concerned for the subject too, everything is just getting transferred. Now, are you including a title company in this transaction, or?
Yeah, so there's, in some states, people will close these without a title company. As a licensed realtor, I don't think that you should do that. And obviously you have to have the proper disclosures in your documents, basically saying that you are a licensed realtor. In my personal opinion, I feel like as a licensed realtor, the more professional people who are doing their jobs that you can have involved in these, the less liability there is to you and your brokerage firm, which is obviously a huge concern when you're a licensed agent. And so to me, I used to, before I got my license, close subject to deals at tabletop, because really all you need is a notary. So we would do them at the kitchen table, or we would meet at a mailboxes, etc. store or whatever, and just have things notarized and stuff. But once I became licensed, I didn't feel like that was a fair liability to put on the brokerage before I owned my own. So I just don't do that anymore. I think it's just definitely better to have a title company there to make sure they're explaining to the people exactly what's happening, even though you're explaining it during the transaction. And if you saw my disclosure, I mean, I have disclosures that basically say, you understand this, I mean, it's in like Dick and Jane, if anybody remembers the Dick and Jane book series writing, like it is elementary 101. But even with that, I want a title company, like as a third party neutral person, to go through that and make sure that that person can't ever come back later and say that, I held them under duress and they, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. I just think as a licensed agent, you're better off to have as many neutral parties involved as you can.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well then we'll get into some case studies. Okay, so this one here is a Lawrence, Arizona fourplex that I got from a tired landlord. Obviously, you can tell by the price, this was some time ago. And we don't have $149,000 fourplexes anymore, even in Lawrence. But this was 4 2-bedroom, 1-bath units. It was advertised as a 13.2 cap rate, and the adjusted gross income on this one was $27,319. Our total rent on this one was $23,447, and our operating expenses were $71,009, which made our net operating income $22,495. So what we did on this one, we purchased this one. I'll go back. I wish I could do this side by side. That'd be really nice. So you can see it was listed for $149. Okay, and we basically went in and we did seller financing with $10,000 down. So this is a case, Tanisha, to answer your question, where they did ask, actually they wanted $25,000 down, and I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So we ended up negotiating to the $10,000 down, and we gave them 5.5% interest. So at the $149 price, our P&I payment, they agreed to finance it for 30 years, was $911. So just to remind you, what the monthly rent on that was $23,447. Okay, so our payment to him was $911. It still is, actually. Private lender, we brought in a private lender for $50,000. Okay, so I brought in a private lender to cover the $10,000 down payment, and I talked about private lending on a previous training, but brought in a private lender to cover the $10,000 down payment and $10,000 for each of the units to fix them up, because they were kind of a little rough. So it wasn't a huge rehab or anything by any means, but it was just to kind of get them better looking cosmetically. We raised the rents on that unit, or in those units, from $700 a month, or to $700 a month, from, I believe it was like 5 something. Let's go back, 550 on average. So there was one like 530 and one like 580. But basically we raised them to $700 a month, which generated $33,600 a year. For me, the return on this is infinite because I had zero money into that deal. So as you can see, for the seller financing, they wanted the $10,000 down, and I borrowed private money to do that. And so I have zero money into this deal. And so that's an infinite return for me. And this property is now almost paid in full. I think we have like 2 years left, actually, on this one, 2 or 3. I accelerated payments a couple of years ago on all of our properties, so we're getting them all paid off a lot faster. So that was one here, right here in Arizona, quite some time ago. Oh, I made a little boo-boo on my slide. So this one is in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is a subject to property that we bought. Actually, it's just outside of Knoxville. This was a divorce situation. You can see very lovely home, pretty house. Couple was getting a divorce. They had about $29,000 worth of equity in that, which really wasn't a lot of equity once they went to sell it. So the PITI on that for them was $853 a month. And they only had 3 years into it. So which is why they didn't really, Knoxville's one of those markets until recently during the major craziness. Really, Knoxville kind of just appreciates it like 3% a year, like that's it. And so if you try to sell your house in the first 5 years, you basically are going to break even if you're lucky, because there hasn't been a lot of appreciation in the properties. And that's what happened with this one. I think this one was way back in like 2003 that we bought, but this was a 27-year loan left on the property. It was about a $210,000 balance. So we took over the property, subject to, started making the payments for them. And then we turned around and sold this on what's called a lease option, which is essentially a way of for us doing owner financing to somebody else. So we turned around and sold this on owner financing, if you will, to somebody else for $250. Okay, we took it over for the $210 balance. So we bought it at $210. We're selling it for $249 on a lease option. We raised the mortgage payment to $1,150 a month. Plus they have to pay their own repairs in our contract. So we were paying the $853 and they were paying us $1,150. So we were making that spread on that. When we advertised this, we got a buyer who came in and said, hey, I have $50,000 to put down on this, and I want to pay my first year's rent in full. Is that okay? We said, sure, that's okay. So when we got that deal closed, we put $63,800 cash in our pocket, and that was coming to this deal with zero money out of pocket because it was a divorce situation. We just took over the payments. So we ended up putting in our pocket $63,800 on that one. Now that one turned out to be a horrible deal in the long run. Actually, the deal itself was great. The house and the tenant that had all that money ended up being horrible. But that's a whole nother story. I'm a court advocate for abused children, so I have an obligation to report people, and ended up having to report my own tenant for some abuse, and that got kind of ugly. Needless to say, she did kind of trash the place when she moved out a little bit, but in the long run, it ended up fine financially. But this was one of my favorite deals ever, and one of my favorite houses. Now, this one was a really interesting education. This is the first time I ever subdivided a property. So this property is also outside of Knoxville, about an hour outside of Knoxville, in an area called Lake City, Tennessee. There was 2 houses on one lot, as you can see them here. Nothing fancy, actually a little ugly, to be honest. It was listed for sale for 2+ years for $179,900. The problem is most people don't need 2 houses, you know, and so the realtor was really having a hard time. And quite honestly, they were overpriced as well. But the realtor was having a hard time because nobody really needs to buy 2 houses at one time. They were owned free and clear, and they had new carpet, paint, and appliances in them. So they were in decent shape. I mean, you can see they're clean houses. There was some seller trauma involved. So the seller just really didn't want to deal with it anymore. Some things that happened to her in her life there. But the realtor was marketing it as 2 houses. And again, I said, like, it was a little overpriced. So it had sat on the market for a long time. The seller called us. Her name's Kathy, actually, and we still work with her today. And she said, look, I don't know if you can help me. My house has been on the market for 2 years. This is the situation. And we'd never bought a house out in that area. It was an hour outside of our area. It's kind of more of a rural area. And I was kind of a little hesitant to do it. So we wouldn't put it under contract at first. I told her I wanted to kind of soft market it and see, and that she had to get the listing, removed. So we went and put a sign in the yard and to test it, because I wanted to see, just even going to get any calls on this. And within about a 30-hour time period, it essentially broke our phone system. We had over 300 calls on these 2 properties because of the way our signs read. And so we were like, wow, okay, people actually do want to buy out there. So then we put it under contract. So it'd be like the equivalent here of buying like somewhere between here and Safford. Like, what, I don't know, do people want to live there? I just didn't know. So we wanted to kind of test it out before we put it under contract. So what we offered her then, I went back and offered her, told her I thought the $179,900 price was too high for the 2 houses. One of them was essentially, I don't know if you could tell, but this one here is actually a trailer. So this is actually a manufactured home on a permanent foundation. So it's not technically a trailer the way, but it was a manufactured home. So I explained to her that those depreciate in value and that I felt like the $179,000 price was too high. So I offered her $110,000 purchase price for both houses. We offered her 0 down owner financing at 6% interest for 30 years. So essentially, we told her, we'll make payments to you for $656.22 each and every month until we're paid in full. That's how I describe it. We did put a substitution of collateral clause in the contract, and I'll explain why in a moment. I do them in all my contracts, but you'll see where it benefited me later. In this situation, we had the 2 houses now. We put them under contract. We got them closed, and I had no idea how much this was going to cost. It was a complete crapshoot, but I felt like based on the number of calls that we got and the discount on the price that I was able to negotiate, that we were going to be okay. So we went to the county and decided to go ahead and try to get them separated. And so we spent $2,089 and about 3 months of legwork getting approvals to have those properties surveyed and subdivided. And got that all done. We had to add a little, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like some kind of a thing from the sewer because they were essentially sharing a sewer. So we had to add some sort of a little leg, like, if you will. So all that $2,000 cost included all of that. And then once we got them separated and had them appraised, the combined value for both of those appraised at 165. So a nice score on us. We were able to negotiate that really nice. So we had each of those. We sold the first one on a lease option. The price was $124,900, and they gave us a $7,000 option consideration, which is kind of the down payment in a lease option. They made monthly payments to us while he got a loan. The gentleman was like 70 years old. He didn't have bad credit. He just didn't have any credit. He was one of those good old boys who just paid cash for everything all the time. So we had to spend some time getting his credit established. It actually took a little longer than we expected, but it was fine. He was making payments to us that whole time. So we were getting payments of $650 a month for about 2 years, which got us the $15,600. And our payout on that house was $98,389. We actually did have to come down a little bit because of appraisal, but it all worked out well in the end. The second house, the one that wasn't the one that was the trailer, we actually sold on owner financing. We sold that to them for $78,700. They gave us a $30,000 down payment. So then we financed the remaining $48,000, which they're still making payments to this day of $374.46 at 8.5% interest. So that combined, we sold both of those for $203,600. Now, where that substitution of collateral clause came in, because remember, the seller in the beginning was seller financing for us, and we were making payments to her. So I always have a substitution of collateral clause in my contracts with seller financing for this exact reason. When we went back to her and said, okay, we've got all this big chunk of money, we want to go ahead and pay you off, where do you want us to send the money? She said, I don't want my money. You guys are making me payments. If I have a big chunk of $50,000 in cash or anything like that, my family's going to take it and I'm not going to benefit from it ever. And she's like, I don't want that to happen. She's like, I just want to keep receiving these monthly payments that you guys are sending me. It's helping me. I'm making my car payment with it and some utility payments, and I don't want my money back. So we were able to use that substitution of collateral because remember, a mortgage and a deed of trust were created on that. And a mortgage is simply a form of collateral that says that this property is tied to this promissory note. So that's what the mortgage does. So the substitution of collateral clause allows me to substitute collateral. So no longer is this house part of the collateral. It can't be because I just sold it to the little old man. Okay. And so now I was able to substitute another collateral that we had in our inventory. So we had another house that we had that had a lot of equity in it. We were able to move her collateral from that one property to the other property so that we didn't have to give her money back. And actually we ended up, in this case, I think we ended up moving it, to 2 properties. And then we continued her financing. She's still a private lender for us today at 4% interest. And she'll never want her money back. I've tried to pay her probably, I would say 7 or 8 times over the years, and she just does not want her money back. So we finally added a clause into it where her granddaughter, who she wanted the money to go to eventually, is finally straightened out and living normal and all that. So at some point, as her heir, she will get that continued monthly payment. And maybe one day when I ask the granddaughter if she wants the full amount, she'll take it. But for now, they're still 4% owner financing us as private lenders. So that's been kind of a nice deal. And she's a wonderful lady. So on all of these situations, I just say that you really just want to get creative. Again, I can't stress enough, it's never about the house, it's about the person and their situation. And that last situation is an example. That woman would not even go into any of those houses. She would not even drive onto the property. There was a trauma that went on with her in her life in that house, and she just wanted to get rid of those houses. So even though she had them listed for $179 for 2 years, when I made her a $110,000 offer, a lot of people might be like, wow, that's ridiculous. She's not going to take that. she is going to take it because I solved all of her problems. She needed some payments, she needed some cash, and she wanted those stupid houses gone because they were causing her more and more stress every day that they were in her life. So I encourage you just to kind of get creative and really get to know your people and what their situation is. That's really the number one thing. The house doesn't matter as long as it's a house you would want to own. The details of the house don't matter. You need to ask those, I mean, because you have to get them and to run comps and all that kind of stuff. But you really have to just build rapport with sellers, get into the conversation with them about what are they trying to solve, what is their problem, and building that rapport with them to really get to know them and their situation. It's not going to work for most deals. I mean, the reality of this is people will come to me all the time. They're like, oh, I made an owner financing deal. They wanted full cash. It doesn't work. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't work 95% of the time, but 5 times out of 100, it does. So you're really looking for that 5% when you're looking for these. So you can't get discouraged by the fact that, you know, you got to know 3 times. Like, you have to take 95 no's before you're going to get a yes. You know, it's not for everybody. And again, you have to go back to the beginning when I said you're really looking for people who need to sell, not just want to sell. Okay. If they have all the time in the world, they have a mortgage, they're able to make their payments, they're fine and ready and able to wait out the market and wait for the right offer. Those are not the people that are going to be accepting of these types of offers. It's usually people who have a underlying stressor or some sort of motivation like we discussed. So you just have to ask. Oftentimes I will offer more than the ask price for owner financing. If you think about it, if you're not having to pay higher interest rates, pay closing costs and all of those things, then you can, I mean, think about when you sit down at a closing and they show you, if you're getting a mortgage for a $300,000 house, at the end of the 30 years, you're going to be paying 1.3 million for this house or whatever the number is. It's ridiculous. So at the end of the 30 years, you're paying that much more with interest and everything. So if I pay with owner financing and I don't have any of those additional expenses, but I pay $310,000 for the house, I'm still coming out way ahead. So oftentimes I will offer to pay a little bit higher than ask price for owner financing terms. And I always try to make it a win-win. I always ask the questions 1,000 times because people will not disclose it immediately. They have to feel like they can trust you and that you are truly trying to save their situation and help solve their problem. When they do that, then you can make a win-win situation for both of them. And it's all about building rapport and trust with people and figuring out what is their problem and how you can solve that. So a couple of people had asked me last time about the wholesaling training that I did. I think it is up on the Suite Assist, but this one, if you want to go to this link, this is a training that I did. Sorry guys, but this one was for women only. But so you'll hear me say she and women and stuff a lot, but you're welcome to watch it. It's on my website. But you can go to that and it's an entire training about an hour long on wholesaling. And then I have a bunch of resources and stuff on there that I gave to those ladies for free. So there's a presentation that I did, but wholesaling is another way. I didn't put it in here because it is another way of buying property with no money down, but because it's not really buying and owning and keeping, you're just kind of selling the contract. I didn't include it in here, but it is a way of controlling and profiting from properties with no money down, but you're not really holding it. So I didn't include it in this training today, but you can get some additional training there on wholesaling if that's what you're interested in as well. And that is my presentation. So any questions? Any more questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. Hold on, there's something in the chat. Let me see. Jess, can you do creative financing during commissioner sales? Do you mean like auction sales?
Yes. Back in my hometown in Kentucky, they do a lot of like auction sales, and I was wondering, could you do creative finances to make a deal?
Yeah, it's pretty rare because usually those commissioner type sales and auction sales are cash only. Now, what you can do is you can bring in private money for that kind of thing. So And then in some states, there's I just blanked out, right to redemption. And so depending on why the property is in at the auction, like in Minnesota as an example, we lived in Minnesota for 8 months, and at the time, I think Minnesota has changed their right to redemption now, but at the time it was like 2 years. So if a person faced foreclosure and lost their house, they had 2 years to redeem that property and pay it off in full, and then they could get their house back. So what you could do in that situation is you could go to the seller or to the person who used to own the house, and you could say to them, look, you owe $180,000 to redeem this. If I give you $190,000, let's say the house might be worth $250 now or $300, you know, if I give you $190,000, would you go redeem this, get the house back? You pay them the 180, you keep the 10, and then I'll get the house from you. And so you can do things like that in areas. I'm not 100% certain on Kentucky's rights of redemption, so I don't know if that's something you could use at the auction. You'd have to investigate that, but it's called rights to redemption. And then you could bring a private lender in that would be willing to loan on the property, and you could purchase it cash. So it's not so much creative financing as it is you wouldn't have to have all the cash yourself. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? Don't be shy. All right. Well, thank you all for allowing me to educate you. Again, this is the last of my series of trainings for now. I'm sure we'll find something else to come up with. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, and I'm happy to help and help you on your journey.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Courtney. That was so
Thank you,
cool.
Courtney.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Courtney.
You are welcome.
you,
Everybody have a great
Courtney.
day.